What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Welcome back into JC's Pop Culture with me, JC, where you can see all kinds of pop culture content. Could be anything from trailer reactions to EA Sports college football news, or what we have today, a movie review for the newly released Roadhouse remake, reimagining, I guess you could call it more so here, the 2024 film directed by Doug Liman, starring Jake Gyllenhaal in the, titular role there, I guess, as, Dalton, the main character, although they did switch it up from the original Roadhouse. We get Elwood Dalton this time. So, I think that that's a good move. If you're going to do a remake, do something like that. So points right there on top of it, from the beginning once I learned that. And, I'm also a big fan of Jake Gyllenhaal. Most things that he does, I really enjoy. So that was a plus going into the movie. Obviously, I think a big hit to it maybe about a month ago, 2 months ago, don't remember when that shit was. We talked about it on the JC's Pop Culture podcast episode, a couple of them. You got Doug Liman coming out, against Amazon because he wanted the movie to be released theatrically. They released it, straight on Prime, obviously. And so that was a big, ordeal. And, honestly, after having watched the film now, I did enjoy it, and I probably do agree with Doug Liman that it would have been successful in theaters and could have been successful in theaters, and I fucking would love to see a good action movie in the theaters yet again because, it seems like they've been few and far between over the past, 10, 20 years, since the late 90s when they were really prevalent and shit. So, this was a good action movie, fun to watch and entertaining. However, I do still disagree with him, coming out and disparaging Amazon ahead of the film's release because that's not going to do nothing but hurt your film in the long run when it's already, said and set in stone what's happening at that point. And, then you had to be a guy like Jake Gyllenhaal who has to be like, hey, I can't necessarily take Doug Liman's side because I want to still work with the studio. You got to have that respect for the studios and shit. And especially before the movie's released, you don't want to be shitting on it. I think most people know that. So I still think that was a bad move. But I do think this movie could have been, well, received in theaters really because I enjoyed it here on Amazon Prime. But having said that, let me just give some of my overall brief thoughts because this will be a spoiler review. I'm going to dive into the plot and shit, and we'll discuss that further here momentarily. So, if you haven't seen it yet, pause this, go watch it, come back. Or if you don't care about spoilers, don't give a shit, that's fine. Stay here, but get into my overall thoughts here. I'll let you know before I get into the spoiler talk. But personally, I thought that this really kind of, I guess, exceeded my expectations a little bit. Maybe it's just because going into it, I was a little bit disparaging on some of the remakes that I'd seen lately and shit. Some of them hadn't really hit the nail on the head, but I thought that this was just really well done because, like I said, they changed enough to kind of do their own thing while, keeping within, I guess, the parameters, the framework kind of that original film a little bit as well. So it really, I think, does enough to satisfy people that were fans of the original. Now, do I prefer the original film? Let's get that out of the way right now. Obviously, yes, the original film is better, but I think that this is a more successful attempt at trying to do a remake than some of these ones we've seen recently, especially when you're talking about ones that have gone straight to streaming. I'm looking at you, How High. I'm looking at you, White Men Can't Jump, which I'll be honest, I haven't even taken the time to watch it. Maybe it's not as bad as I heard, who knows. But I thought that this was, a good venture down that lane as well as, where others have really failed in the past. This one was a little bit more successful, I thought, in paying homage, but also doing its own thing within, those guidelines. They did a good job of that. So you get the nostalgia piece, but then they also switch it up and do some different shit. So I think that fans of the original will probably enjoy this enough, although they'll be like, I hate the effects, some of the CGI in it that was in there they may not enjoy, but I think that they'll enjoy it enough to be able to, get through it and watch it and still, prefer the original, but I think it's enjoyable enough that they'll get some entertainment out of it. While also this could bring new fans to the original, but I think if you're coming into this having never seen the original, it's good for you as well. You don't necessarily have to have seen the first one to see this one by any means. So that's a good, thing as far as entry point is concerned to the now franchise, I guess you can call it, with 2 films in the books now with this remake. But having said that, that's, more of the positive talk, just kind of keeping it as vague as possible before I get into spoilers. But then on the negative side, it does go to that CGI for me. I think there were some points in the film where it kind of hit that uncanny valley, stuck out a little bit. I'll, mention what parts when I get into the spoiler talk. But other than that, Conor McGregor, unfortunately, I thought he did a great job as far as the action scenes were concerned. They looked really good for the most part. They were choreographed well and filmed really well. Some of the things they did there, they did cool POV stuff in some of the fight scenes that was really awesome. One of my really favorite things of the film was how they filmed some of the fight scenes, some of the action in the movie. But he's not necessarily necessarily an actor, so some of his lines come off a bit, I guess, stilted, you could say. And I also think that maybe it's, some of it seemed to me like it was some ADR work, and maybe where he hadn't done that, it wasn't necessarily matching up right, and just felt a little weird to me sometimes. I guess you could kind of tell it was ADR, is kind of the way I felt about it. So that was a little bit off. And then, some of the other side characters, they were just kind of hit or miss. The guy that plays Ben Brandt in the film, he was okay. The sheriff, some of those just kind of felt like not really fully fledged out characters, I guess you could say. But for the most part, the main characters you get in the film, I thought did a good job. Of course, the main one being Jake Gyllenhaal knocks it out of the park yet again. So, well filmed, well acted. Really like the way they did, some of the cinematography, especially with those action scenes that I was talking about. But then on the con side, I think some of the effects, the CGI really didn't hit the best mark on some of the shit. And it was a little bit, like I said, it hits that uncanny valley, and you're like, oh, that looks a little fucking weird right there. So that was some of the negative points for me. And then I think for the most part, I was really thought I was going to give this film an extremely high score. And honestly, once I got into the third act, that kind of dropped my score probably about half a point, which I'll give my score here at the end. But that's just kind of my overall, spoiler-free thoughts before I dive into spoilers here. So I wanted to get those out of the way. So if you haven't watched the movie, you want to go check it out and shit, go watch it, come back, and then come back here and check out the spoilers, because I'm going to dive into the plot now and talk some spoilers for Roadhouse. Let's get into this shit. All right, so starting off opening scene, you get Post Malone in the film. I didn't even realize he was in this shit too, to go along with Conor McGregor, which Post Malone, he's been in more stuff. I think he goes by Austin Post, his actual name there, if you look it up on IMDb, I'm not mistaken, or at least it used to. See if I can look on the Roadhouse IMDb real quick and see. But nonetheless, he's in the opening scene, and basically, kind of the context that you're given is he's running through people, just fighting people left and right here in this opening scene. His name is Carter Ford. He's won 6 fights in a row here in the opening scene. And yeah, he is listed as Austin Post, just like I thought. So, goes by his real name as far as IMDb is concerned. But he's ran through about 6 different fights. You see a guy come in with the hood on. It's not really revealed yet that it's, Jake Gyllenhaal's character of Dalton, but you're kind of assuming. He comes in there, the Carter Ford character, the Austin Post is playing, is super fucking, cocky at this point, doesn't really care who it is, feels like he's about to win this fight, win this money, and, that's up for grabs right there, because it's winner takes all. You hear announced there when they're about to fight, and then, of course, Jake Gyllenhaal takes off his stuff, reveals who he is, and you get, kind of a audible gasp, I guess, a real reaction from, both Post Malone and the crowd. And Carter Ford kind of talking to somebody else was like, you know who that is? He's like, yeah, I'm not fighting him and shit. So automatically from the beginning, you realize, oh, this guy must be known for doing some bad shit or something. This guy who's fought 6 people doesn't even want to fight him and everything. And so he's like, fuck this, I'm not fighting him. Bows out, and Dalton gets the money, prize money right there, right away from the beginning and shit. Which obviously people that had some fucking money involved on the betting for those fights were going to be pretty pissed. So predictably, he's kind of followed out into the parking lot, and the guy, comes up and actually stabs him in the side with the knife. But his reaction is almost like no reaction. Scares the guy so much, with the shit that he says, that he runs off and leaves the knife in him. He's like, hey, ain't you going to take your knife? And there is some, pretty funny one-liners that did make me laugh in this movie and shit, and that was one of them. And then he goes back to his car, starts doctoring up his own stab wound and shit, just kind of a little bit of badassery there from the opening that we see, kind of get a little bit of context of how this character lives his life. And this is when we're introduced to Frankie, who comes out, following him. She was there watching the fight. She was actually scouting Carter Ford, Austin Post's character. She wanted him to come, to the Roadhouse. Obviously, we know where this is going. He turns it down. He's sleeping in his car that night. He gets run off by the police. He goes, parks his car in front of some train tracks. You think he's contemplating suicide. The last second, changes his mind, moves the car, gets hit, and then looks down where Frankie had given him her number, and he decides, all right, let's do this shit. I'm going to go down to the Glass Keys in Florida. I'm going to, be the bouncer at this Roadhouse and shit. And boom, movie ensues. Let's get this shit rolling. And once Dalton arrives in town, he, sitting there at the bus stop or wherever the hell he's sitting. I can't remember, but it's across from a bookstore. And that's when he meets, this little girl, Charlie, and, her dad, Steven, that owned this bookstore. And, you come to find out their mother has, passed away. And it's obviously a relationship that he forms with these characters right off the bat throughout the movie, continually come back to this bookstore and have this really cool relationship with this family here that I thought was really, a kind of, emotional part of the movie, I guess you could say, especially when you find out the backstory involved, not only of the family, losing the mother and shit, but also, of course, of Dalton, the tragic shit that happened to him in his past, the reason that people were afraid of him in the opening, which you wouldn't find out till later in the film, but they, of course, would be recurring characters there, that he meets here at this bookstore in the opening. So kind of a, crucial scene here when he first gets to Glass Key. And so from there, of course, he goes to the Roadhouse, and he's in there during the daytime, and he's talking about, hey, this place is kind of peaceful and shit. And of course, once it turns to night, things change. You got fights going on and everything, which, no big deal. But then you see, this group of bikers pull up, and they're coming in there to, just wreak havoc and shit. It's the character of Dale, you come to find out, who, remains consistent throughout most of this film in his appearances and shit. But to me, it just made me laugh because the fact that it was a biker and it was the dude that played EZ Reyes on Mayans MC, JD Pardo, I believe is his name. Yeah, JD Pardo. And it's just funny to me because I was a huge Sons of Anarchy fan. It's my favorite, TV series of all time. So I obviously watched Mayans. I haven't watched all of it yet. I need to go back and finish it. I think I watched like the first 2 seasons, so I got a little bit more left to finish up on that one. But he played the main character in that show. And so just seeing him show up as a biker again, I instantly was like, oh, that's fucking EZ Reyes. They just gave him blonde hair to make it, not be the same character. And obviously he acts different in this and shit. But it was just funny to me, the tie-in right there. I'm like, oh, I guess he's going to be typecast as a biker for a while because of fucking Mayans and shit. But nonetheless, he shows up. They're causing havoc, and Dalton comes over, is like, hey, you guys want to step outside? They're like, nah, we're not fucking done or whatever. He breaks some more pool sticks, and then he asks them about their bikes, and he walks out, like he's about to do something to the bikes because he knows that will get them to come outside finally. So they all come outside, and it's 5-on-1, and immediately you learn the badassery of Jake Gyllenhaal's Dalton character, kicking all 5 guys' asses, and he doesn't get hit one time. And then he, even gives him a ride to the hospital. So although this is a character that will whoop your ass, he's also kind of got this little kind streak about him that's there throughout the film, this underlying goodness, good heart and shit that he showcases. He gives these guys a ride to the hospital, takes them there, and that's when you meet the doctor character, Ellie, who would be, consistent throughout the film, kind of the love interest of Dalton here in this Roadhouse remake. And so he has his first interaction with Ellie, and then following, that, we kind of are looking outside. There's a car outside watching him, and it's kind of that, prototypical scene you get in, an action movie where the bad guys are watching somebody and you're trying to learn about the antagonist who you haven't really been revealed yet, and it's like, oh, is that him? Yeah, that's him, pretty much, the stereotypical dialogue there that you get. So that's not necessarily the best scene, but I guess you kind of gotta have it there to kind of introduce the antagonist, which we would come to find out is the character of they call Mr. B at this point in the movie. Of course, we come to find out it's Ben Brandt, him and his father. I think his name's Gil Brandt, Jill Brandt, Gene Brandt. I don't fucking know. He's barely in the movie. He's just on the phone as a character and shit that's kind of running things from prison. But they're basically an old Florida family. They've built most of the town and shit. They want to own the Roadhouse, obviously, to tear all that shit down. They want to build a resort, is basically the plot that you find out later in the film. Blah, blah, blah. Not necessarily, the greatest, villain plot or anything. It's pretty, I guess, stereotypical, you could call it. Pretty, cliche, but I think I'm not mad at cliche right now, just because you're getting, this action movie that is a, remake of an 80s action movie where that's just kind of how shit went. It was simple. That's all you needed. Good guy, bad guy, throw in some badass action scenes along the way till you get to that ultimate, meet up at the end and shit. And that's what we all want to see in an action movie. So I'm not complaining about that by any means. I'm super, for that type of action movie. Just kind of turn your brain off. What's going to happen. We're going to establish good versus bad, and we're going to fight this shit out. And I was there for it. I was entertained by this movie all the way through, especially through the first half of this film. Like I said earlier, before I get into spoiler-free stuff, once we get into, later, right ahead to the third act, it kind of slows down for me a little bit, and there was some stuff in the third act that I'm like, and it dropped my score a little bit. But at this point, I'm fucking riding along with the shit. I'm liking the song choices. I think the action scenes are all shot well and everything, and I'm here for it. But after we're introduced to the villain and get to know, Ben Brandt and shit, played by Billy Magnuson in this movie, which, he was fine. I didn't, no home run performance, but not a bad performance, I would say, either. He was serviceable in the role that he was playing there in the movie, nonetheless. But you get another scene with Dalton and Ellie, and this is when she kind of warns him about the town and how it's kind of corrupt. Especially, she specifically mentions the police, of course, which will come back into play here in a little bit. And what I think was kind of the big, twist of the film that you would get here in a little bit, which I'll get to that momentarily. But from there, and that, warning from Ellie that warns him, he could get hurt or worse, which obviously is kind of saying, hey, you might get killed if you keep fucking around with this shit. And of course, right on cue, he's walking home, back to the Roadhouse, and the truck pulls up and kind of tries to run him down. Obviously, it's, the JD Pardo's character of Dale in this film, yet again, tries to hit him with the truck. He, jumps and dodges that shit. And at that point, the CGI didn't look that bad. I'm like, it was a little spotty. But then after that, you see the truck back up, and there's this scene where he kind of busts through the side of the fucking bridge that they're on, busts through the guardrail while reversing. And also, Dalton jumps into the bed of the truck kind of all at once. And it was really fucking bad CGI at that point, I guess. I don't even know if you'd call it bad, but as much as you could just tell it was CGI. It was that uncanny valley that I was talking about earlier. I was talking about the spoiler-free shit, and that was really one I had to make note of in my notes, because that was when I was like, that kind of knocks it a little bit. I don't like that. I miss, practical effects. I know it can't all be practical effects, especially with some shit like that. That's, tough to, have a stunt guy do and shit. But, there's the CGI on it looked a little bit off from there. He would fall into the water, the truck would fall into the water, but he would be able to, swim ashore and shit, save himself and all that. But of course, once he gets back, to the roadhouse, Dale's there waiting for him, gun pointed at him. He attacks him, wrestles the gun away from him, and earlier in the film, there's been, warnings about this crocodile. Multiple characters have warned about this crocodile near where he's staying on this boathouse that he's elected to stay at and shit for free. And he throws J.D. Pardo's character out the fucking window. What's his name? Dale, out the window and shit. And immediately, as soon as he hits the water, I'm thinking, this is going to be fucking crocodile shit. And of course it is. Dalton tries to save him, pull him up, but he can't. The crocodile takes him. And, everyone's like, they won't find his body. Crocodiles hide their food and shit. So nonetheless, that's, kind of the end of Dale's character. And so obviously this is when you're like, they're going to bring somebody else in to help lead this shit. And the way that they introduce not the character of Knox, which is Conor McGregor's character, which I'm like hour into the film at this point, I'm like, oh shit, Conor McGregor hasn't even came in yet. So he comes in pretty much mid second act for the back half of this film. And not the character of Ben Brandt, because obviously the father running things from prison's pissed because the bouncer Dalton's kicking all their asses and he thinks things aren't going well, so he kind of goes over his head, calls Conor McGregor's character, who's fucking currently walking naked through the streets of Italy, burning down clothing stores and shit, when he's like, I'll be on my way. And that's kind of his entry point into the film. And then he comes into Glass Key, takes over, and is talking about, hey, I'm gonna try and do this a nice way once, then we're just gonna fucking burn the roadhouse down and shit. And so, right away, this is a, quote unquote bad motherfucker, right? Showing up. And obviously, Conor McGregor looks the part. He's fucking got jacked for this movie. Obviously can do the action scenes with his experiences, one of the best UFC fighters ever. But, like I said, not necessarily an actor. Some of the ADR was off in some of his lines and stuff. So I don't think the movie necessarily dropped off when he came in, because you still got some of the better action scenes later in the film once him and the character of Dalton squared off. They do it a couple times, and they were pretty good action scenes both times. But I do think that just for some reason it felt like the film just kind of slowed down a little bit, right at this midpoint. And, it picks back up, and then it kind of dropped off for me a little bit in the third act. But something about it just felt off. I don't know if it was just, editing or something about the pacing here at this midpoint was a little bit off for me, so that kind of knocked it a little bit, because at that point it was a super high score, and just kept taking a half point, a little point off here and there. But I think my overall score may still surprise you, because I actually really did enjoy this film, and we'll get to that momentarily. But we got to get to, of course, the third act of this movie, which unfortunately for me I had a little bit of mixed feelings about, because you get probably the best action scenes and shit, and the way that they're filmed is fucking awesome. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then there were just some little things that really knocked it down a peg for me as well. All right, so after we get Knox's introduction, and he goes and he gets his meetup with Ben Brandt, and we get the weird fucking ADR dialogue in that scene for Conor McGregor's character. But you learn that he's running this shit now and taking over. Then we get Dalton with these corrupt cops that we kind of assumed was coming after Ellie's warning earlier. They take him, down to this, ship docks, looks like, or I guess boating docks, whatever the fuck you call them, down there. And he meets, the sheriff, who gets in the front seat, identifies himself as Big Dick. That's what everybody calls him. And Dalton's like, I'm not going to call you that. And, pretty much they're threatening him, and Dalton's like, I'm not leaving. And so at that point, they're just like, all right, we're just going to kill this guy. They throw him out of the car. The two cops that brought him there got guns pointed at him. The sheriff character has guns pointed at him. And at this point, this is when you see Ellie pull up, and this is when you get that, twist I was talking about. She comes up, she slaps the sheriff in the face, and I'm like, who the fuck is she that she can do this? And then I'm thinking, obviously it's probably like her dad or something. And that's what's revealed, when she takes Dalton, they leave. She says, hey, he is my dad and shit, but you are going to have to leave, or they're not going to stop and everything. But of course, he's not planning on listening to that. He just heads back to the roadhouse. But of course, when he gets there, Ben Brandt's there. And then we get these characters meeting face to face for the first time. And this is when you finally get, the explanation of, the tragic backstory of the Dalton character that Jake Gyllenhaal's playing here. You'd seen, bits and pieces throughout, his nightmares in the film, which they called, boat dreams. They referred to, being on the water makes the dreams weird. And he's having these nightmares about him back when he was a UFC fighter. And this is when you learn that he actually was fighting one of his friends and, went crazy more or less, and after knocking him out and winning the fight, just kept punching him, and of course ultimately killed his own friend there in the fight. And you see Ben Brandt using this, and Ben Brandt's not threatening him, not doing anything. He's just kind of trying to fuck with him psychologically and mess with his mind a little bit. That's what the character Ben Brandt shows up there to do, and then just kind of heads out because he knows that Knox is coming in, and I guess he thinks if he's fucked with Dalton's heads enough that he's really not going to do anything when Knox comes there. And I guess for a point he's right, because Knox comes in, immediately starts fucking shit up and just causes basically an absolute riot. The entire bar is fighting, turns into a giant bar fight, and then he's just yelling out for Dalton and shit a million fucking times. And then eventually you get Dalton approaching, and it's just pretty awesome because he's making his way over to him, and the entire bar, man, is just choreographed fight scenes going on just all over, everywhere that you see, they all across the whole set. So that was pretty fucking cool that this whole set is fighting, and then you're kind of focused on the fighting scene between Dalton and Knox here in their first big fight. And this is what I was talking about with some of that awesome camera work. Not only is it fucking cool because it's just tracking them all over the bar, everywhere they're going throughout this crowd of people that's also fighting, but the action is really good, really well shot, throughout that. But what was really cool, I thought, is you get to a point as well, and they did this a couple of times, they bring it back again later, but it's this first person point of view. Knox, Conor McGregor's character, is just throwing punches, and you're in the first person, perspective of the character of Dalton, and you're just, the camera's banging as the punches are coming in and shit, and you got kind of almost like the blurred tunnel vision and shit. It was really cool. It was one of the most innovative, ways to shoot an action scene that I've seen in a while, and I fucking really enjoyed the way that they were doing those action scenes throughout there. So, it's a big bar fight, ends up, wrecking the shit. Knox leaves, and at that point, Dalton's, ready to leave the keys as well. And I thought that was really funny when Frankie shows back up at the roadhouse and shit, that the band is still sitting in the cage, still playing. Everything's fucked up, like no one's there anymore, but they never stop playing throughout the entire fight and shit. So there are just little bits of, kind of ironic comedy and shit throughout here as well that'll make you laugh, I thought. So you need that in, one of these action movies, especially when you're doing a, reimagining of an 80s action flick. But from there, it's, kind of, then you get into a little bit of the, I guess, I don't want to call it necessarily hokiness and shit, but there's these fucking double crosses and just kind of all this contrived shit, really, to get everyone, on this boat together to have this big action scene where you have Dalton, who was loaded up, some dynamite onto a boat that he's stolen from, I believe it's Frankie's ex-boyfriend or whatever, which is fucking Dickhead Trent from the 2009 Friday the 13th remake. What's the actor's name? I can't think of it right off. Travis Van Winkle, but he was fucking Trent in that 2009 Friday the 13th remake. He steals his boat and blows it up on, the big boat that they're on, which of course makes the boat start to sink, and he has to get Ellie. They get off the boat. They're kind of in the water, and you get Knox coming back. He's on a speedboat. You get Ben Brandt on another boat. He takes Ellie, and so Dalton's stuck in the water. Knox comes, he jumps on Knox's boat. They have another fight on the boat. He throws Knox off the boat, who is hanging on to the fucking rope just on the water as, Dalton's driving the boat away, which is pretty fucking crazy. Made me think of Robert De Niro and Cape Fear and shit, just riding underneath the car or whatever the fuck it was, or maybe that was a boat too. I can't fucking remember right off, but nonetheless, so they all make it back to shore. Essentially, they're all back at the roadhouse, which is fucking wrecked because Ben Brandt flies a boat into it. That's how he gets back there. And then once Knox gets back ashore, he drives a fucking truck into the other side of it. So both the back entrance, where the water is, and the front side where the roadside is, both, just completely fucked. One with the boat, one with the truck. And then we get, our final action sequence, our final fight here between Knox and between Dalton. You think Ben Brandt's character's out of it. He would come back in here in a moment. But this fight, pretty fucking cool as well. They bring back the first person camera work and shit. Another awesome action scene. But just, throughout the third act, before we get to this ultimate, conclusion with this action scene that's pretty awesome, there were just a couple things that I'm like, and, it's the sheriff plot with, the kidnapping of his daughter that Dalton didn't even buy into. He knew it was a double cross, but then Ben Brandt really did kidnap her, and so it's a double cross. So that, contriving shit that I was talking about kind of knocked it down for me. And then also before even that, there's a fucking scene where Dalton, does something with one of the cops and kills a guy, and he reports it to the police or whatever, and it's on a payphone. And I'm just like, in my notes, I'm like, there's a fucking why is there a payphone right now in 2024? Is there even still any payphones? Does anybody see payphones? Let me know in the comments, because I haven't seen a payphone in like 20 years personally. So I don't know. That was just in my notes. Like, there's a payphone. So I don't know. It's just a little bit like, really? But, that's just, there's small things that just kind of knocked the third act down a little bit for me. But I really did enjoy the film overall, and still was having a good time despite some of that here in this third act. But then we get to the action scene, the fight between Knox and Dalton yet again, the culmination of it and shit, and it's pretty fucking awesome. It ends with, Dalton gets stabbed pretty much, right in the same spot that we saw him get stabbed in the first act, so kind of bookends the film with that. And, looks like he's about to get stabbed again, but, he pulls that out, stabs McGregor once, stabs him with the other, shiv there, or whatever you want to call it, and just kind of keeps going crazy on him and shit till ultimately that's over. And of course, prior to that, when it looked like he was going to finish Dalton off and Ben Brandt was, pissed and just kept yelling at him and shit, he was like, you talk too much, snapped his neck, so got him out of the way as well. So at that point, both the villains are out of the film, and Dalton, is heading out. Frankie's coming in, and she's looking around. She's like, this place is fixable. And this is kind of the final comedic button I thought that was really good, was people come in, there's a fucking truck in one side of the bar, like I said, the boat's in the other side, and they're like, hey, are you still open? And she's like, yeah, we're still open, we're always open. And so I thought that was a great, kind of comedic button to end that action scene as Dalton goes off. And of course, the big reason that Ben Brandt had kidnapped Ellie was because Dalton had taken a bunch of his money and shit, and he, wouldn't tell him where it was. And of course, at the end, kind of the denouement of the film, as Dalton is leaving town and shit, we see that the money, the big briefcase, of course, is in the bookstore. He's gifted it to Charlie and Steven, and that cool relationship that they had, kind of the emotional, I guess, heart of the film, you could call it, really pays off there at the end. They end up with the money. He rides off into the sunset, just like she had talked to him about throughout the film, because she had, kind of likened him to a character from a Western and shit. So I thought that was a really cool ending that brought it back around, some of the stuff in the beginning of the third act that kind of knocked it down a point or so, for half a point or so for me, really maybe came back around there at the end, because I thought it was a really cool ending, which ultimately, like I said, I had a pretty high score throughout the film, because I was really enjoying this shit throughout, guys. I was laughing. I was, into the action scenes. They were tense, especially at the end. I specifically remember, when McGregor was holding the thing to Dalton's character, about to stab him for the second time. I literally felt the tension almost to where it had you, biting your nails and shit. So I think Doug Liman, a lot of the things that he was saying about the film was true. It was a really good movie. Could have done well in theaters, but I think hopefully it's going to do really well on Prime, and hopefully other people enjoyed it just as much as I did, even if they're fans of the original. But ultimately, my final score for this one, I'm going to land on a 7.5. Probably could have been an 8.0, but that, third act, some of my problems just had to take that little half point off. So I'm going to go 7.5 for this one. Do I enjoy the original better still? Yes, of course. I mentioned that, at the beginning of the review. Want to ride that home because I feel like I'm really highly praising this film, but I thought it was well done. Like I said, the action scenes, some of them were innovative. Really like the way that they were shot. It was fucking a lot of fun one-liners that you want when you're talking, an 80s action movie, or a movie that's reimagining that shit. But then you get, some of the side characters, the acting was off, those ADR problems, and then of course some of the things that I had problems with in the third act knocked it down a little bit. But ultimately, 7.5, still a good score, I think, here for the Roadhouse remake. And that's just kind of my overall thoughts here in this spoiler review on JC's Pop Culture, now that I've kind of rambled on through the plot and probably been too long-winded, as I usually fucking am and shit. But despite that, I would still love to hear your thoughts on the movie. If you've watched Roadhouse, drop them in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? However you're feeling. Appreciate those interactions here on JC's Pop Culture, as always. And if you're a fan of movies and TV shows, especially, ones like this, as well as superhero, comedy, and horror, all that's right up my alley. So be sure, if it's up your alley as well, hop along for the ride here at JC's Pop Culture by hitting the subscribe button. And if you made it this far in the video, hit the thumbs up button. That helps a shit ton with the YouTube algorithm as well. Having said that, I appreciate you tuning into this one, and I'll catch you on the next one.